All right, so we are live on air, and I guess welcome and thank you for finally, or for taking part in this. It's finally able to happen after a couple of cancellations and whatever else. So this is a great opportunity.
It's about the
Thank
same.
you.
It's about the same place that Ultima 8 suffered, so I think that's probably about right.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And we'll get to that right away. But first, if you don't mind me asking, obviously you were the project director for Ultima 8. And I did initially approach you about, or for this interview related to Ultima 8, but before that, how did you get your start? How did you actually start in the games industry?
Well, I had been an Ultima player, since I could tap away at a computer. Actually, I mean, it was something honestly that I grew up with, and I'd always been interested in computers and interested in computer software and computer programming, and I graduated high school, went to college at University of Houston to get my degree, and then after I got my degree, I got this really boring job working for a company called All Right Parking. Yeah, I can't believe they actually hired programmers. But at some point, I was just like, kind of dissatisfied with it, and the department where I was working was being shut down, and I'm like, well, what am I going to do next? Well, as it turned out, Ultima 6 came out at almost that exact same time, and of course, got my Ultima 6 box and put it on the computer and was playing it. And I noticed that Ultima 6 had Origin Systems address on it, and they had moved from Londonderry, New Hampshire, I believe, to Austin, Texas. And I was just 150 miles away in Houston. I'm like, oh my God, Origin is in Austin. So I sent my resume in, and I sent my resume directly to Richard Garriott. And not surprisingly, I heard absolutely nothing. And so I called, I guess, about a week, two later, and they said, well, okay, so you sent your resume in. Who did you send it to? And they said, I sent it to Richard. Oh, well, there's your problem. Don't send it to Richard. Send it to this other guy, Dallas Snell, who you probably just talked to over at Portal Area, right? So Dallas.
Chris Spears says hi, by the way.
Yeah, well, cool. So I FedExed my resume to Dallas to make sure it popped to the top of the list. He called me that day, said, when can you get here for an interview? I said, how about tomorrow? And I interviewed for the job, and they hired me, and there you go. I got my job at Origin Systems right there.
Nice. So you would have come in then some development on Ultima 7 or maybe Savage Empire Martian Dreams.
My first game was Martian Dreams.
Nice.
Yeah.
And just out of curiosity, what were you doing on that one?
What's that?
Just out of curiosity, what was your role on that team?
Programmer. I was a programmer on Martian Dreams and Ultima 7, and I was still doing actually quite a bit of coding on Ultima 8, although I was definitely probably half management, half programming, I guess.
Right, because you were the project director for that one.
Yeah.
And you kind of alluded to this a little bit already, with the mix of programming and management, but yeah, what did that role entail?
So project director, well, what's really funny is that we kind of made it up as we went along, right? Because everybody was trying to figure out how to do big game development back then. I mean, we didn't know. I mean, nobody did. I mean, those games were about as big as games could have been during those days. It was kind of like that decade's Call of Duty Ghosts, right? I mean, it was a lot of money, a huge team, and we really didn't know how to do it. But we did know that somebody kind of needed to keep control of her schedule. And we also knew that someone had to interface with a lot of the other departments outside of product development, like QA, like operations, and that kind of thing. So, and Richard wasn't the type of person to want to do all that sort of minutia. And so we created a structure on the team where you had, lead designers, lead artists, lead program, and then overall the leads, a project director was kind of like master cat herder, or at least thought he was at the time. So that's basically what it was.
Okay, cool. So sort of going off on a bit of a tangent, is there a character in the game based on you? I know that was kind of a thing at Origin.
Not an Ultima 8. I did have a character, oddly enough, in Martian Dreams, in that initial little movie, that little rotoscope movie-looking thing, I played the part of Nikolai Tesla. Okay. And then I think in Ultima 7, if I'm not mistaken, I think I played a character named Gordo, who was a casino runner, or the guy that managed the casino. I think that was my character. But Ultima 8, I did not have a character.
Okay, there we go. Okay, I remember Gordo. Obviously, yeah, we're kind of.
What's weird is I just remembered that name.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I remember the casino because, of course, that's. I read there's one of the fans, Doug the Eagle Dragon, is what he goes by, and right. The casino in Ultima 7 is one of his favorite ways to break the game because once you become a Fellowship member, it's actually impossible to lose at the casino, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what you can do, though, is you can use the casino table because I guess the game individually creates each gold coin as an object, even in a stack. So you can actually create a game-breakingly large sum of money, like that'll actually just cause it to crash out. But I
guess. Well, there's tons of ways to break Ultima. We know that. It's probably one of the more games out there. Not by design, of course, but that's just kind of how it works out sometimes.
Yeah, and that's part of the fun. Anyway, back on task. Fan-related controversies aside, Ultima 8 was known for taking a much darker tone than some of the other Ultima games. Indeed, its depiction of violence was starker. Just the themes of the game were darker. Do you recall what led up to that decision, which, like I say, contrasts rather strongly with some of the other games?
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, I would say there were definitely some dark elements, in previous Ultimas. I mean, I don't think the Shadow Lords in Ultima 5 were exactly lighthearted. The Fellowship in Ultima 7 was pretty grim at certain places. But that said, I think it's correct to say that Ultima 8 was probably, had some of the grimmest aspects of them all. I mean, the very first thing you saw in the game was somebody getting their head chopped off. So, that was a big deal. Even in Ultima 7, the violence that you saw at the beginning of the game was after the fact. In Ultima 8, you actually saw it happen. So yeah, it was definitely darker. I think the decision to do that was definitely Richard's. And he entrusted his co-lead designers, John Watson and Andrew Morris, to kind of make that come to life. He wanted a very different game. He wanted it in a different setting, and I think they pulled that off for sure. I mean, it's definitely a much darker game and very different from many Ultimas.
Definitely, I'll remember to follow up then. I did actually get a hold of Mr. Morris, so I will be talking with him at some point here.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, I just want to let you know we're having a bit of a wicked thunderstorm coming through here. So if I burst in a huge lightning and start running around, you'll know what's going on.
Right.
And if it's too hard for you to hear me, just let me know, and we'll wait till this passes. It probably won't take too long.
Sure, no worries. So anyways, kind of related to the darker tone, obviously Ultima 8 was much more action-oriented. The gameplay style was more like what I guess we would call in modern times an ARPG versus some of the more classical RPG earlier Ultimas. Again, also a fairly significant departure in style. So what drove that?
So Richard played Prince of Persia sometime just around the time Ultima 7 was wrapping up, or Martian Dreams was wrapping up, and was really smitten with how much fun it was and how much more action it was, and still had a lot of RPG elements. So he took a lot of inspiration from that, and he really wanted to try to move the game in that direction. So I think it was definitely Richard that wanted to do that, and he was inspired by Prince of Persia.
Okay, I actually do recall having heard a little bit about Prince of Persia. before. So that would probably also explain the jumping puzzles, because I recall that game had quite a few of them. Now, Ultima 8, of course, I mean, Serpentile also had this, and I'm sure there's examples from earlier in the series too, but there was a lot of cut content from Ultima 8. Richard, of course, is on record at somewhere saying that, that so much was cut from the game that the map, the cloth map, really didn't even reflect the state of the world of Pagan to any particular degree of accuracy. Do you recall anything in particular that did wind up on the cutting room floor?
Well, I recall that Ultima 8, since we were in a new place, and again using new technology, it was harder for us to know how much game we could build and still hit the dates that we wanted to hit. And as it turns out, the dates that we wanted to hit, which March of, I guess, what was it, 1994. That was pretty tricky for us because, A, we really wanted to hit that date because the merger between Electronic Arts and Origin had just finished, right? And we knew it was coming, right? I mean, it wasn't a huge secret. So it became really, really, really important for us, to make those dates. So yeah, I mean, that was one of the first things we did, and I don't think it's uncommon for game developers to do a lot of cutting, in order to get the game that they really want. The way to look at it is, most games, they start with a ton of things that everybody wants to put in the game, and then those things that are less important tend to get removed until all that's left is this really fantastic thing, right? This beautiful sculpture. It has nothing on it that you don't want or don't need. With Ultima 8's case, I think we obviously went way too far cutting in order to get what we wanted. We didn't spend enough time getting the game fun before building all the content. That was probably one of our biggest mistakes. And looking back on that now, after I've been working on a ton of other games, especially like action platformers and other action games on console, you do spend a lot of time getting the game fun and then building content. And we just felt like we were under so much pressure. We started building all this content, but the game wasn't really fun yet. So, we really should have worked on that a little sooner. And that was also a really typical problem at Origin and typical of many game developers. They look at the schedule and they go, my God, to build a game of that size, you have to have 35 people working a year of crunch mode or you're doomed. And so all these people start coming onto your project and start building all these things, but it's not really ready to build yet, and so there's always this pressure that happens, and Ultima 8 was no exception. I don't actually remember why the cloth map didn't match that much. I would actually kind of look at that as just a little bit more of a disorganization between the exact shape of all the things that were going into the world and this thing that looked like Pagan that was an island, right? I don't think it was any more than just a little bit of miscommunication and like, oh my gosh, if the game design requires we need this dungeon over here, well, you're not going to change the map to make that work, So, Britannia was set in stone for years, right? So it was easy to make Britannia look like Britannia, but this is a new place, and so I think that's why that happened.
And I recall too, Jason Eli spoke. Well, that was by email, but he mentioned something too about the fact that and I recall this being said elsewhere too, that you were already pushing the limit of what you could essentially afford to ship with the game, because I mean it was shipping on so many floppy disks that it was almost approaching the point where adding more disks would mean it wasn't really even ever going to be profitable. You're kind of pushing the limits of what you could even afford to put on disks. So you got to trim what doesn't fit on the amount of disks that you can put in the box, I suppose.
And it was putting it on CD-ROM is like that was one of the first games that Origin put on CD-ROM, if I recall. I mean, I could be wrong about that. One of the Wing Commander guys might fight me on that one, but yeah, I had a lot of disks. It was a stretch. It was expensive to do. Actually,
to that point too, I mean, obviously Origin, I got so mad at a Kotaku article about a year ago when they were talking about add-on content in games, and they identified, I can't even remember which game as like one of the first games that had DLC, and they missed the release date of Ultima 7 by a year. Like literally, they did their historical search, and if they'd gone a year earlier, they would have figured out, Ultima 7, Forge of Virtue, Serpentile, Silver Seed. It's like, oh, yeah, that. Ultima 8 obviously had its expansion too in the form of the Lost Veil, which never saw the light of day and became kind of another object of mystery for Ultima fans. The obligatory question is, you wouldn't happen to have a copy of that lying around just in case, but
no, no, I don't.
yeah, it's we were lucky enough that someone found an old summary of the plot in a box, so that actually ended up on the gallery website I sent you a link for. But the actual thing seems lost to time. This is another kind of offbeat question, but you may recall the answer. Harvey Smith, now at Arcane Studios, claimed that he was the main developer on the patch that corrected the jumping, which of course was a little bit sketchy in the initial release of Ultima 8. Does that match your recollection of events?
So what I recall, I mean, Harvey at the time was he was the lead QA for Ultima 8, and I can tell you for a fact that Harvey was instrumental in getting the patch out. He helped identify all the things that were most important, to QA and therefore the players that we needed to fix. And without QA support, it never would have been greenlit. One thing I will say though, to my own defense, is I was very upset at at how players were reviewing Ultima 8 and how the press was reviewing Ultima 8. I mean, that was the first project I'd managed, right? So I was destroyed when it came out. All during the summer, I felt like I was like persona non grata at Origin, because I personally felt like I was being blamed for the mistakes, right? So at some point, like in the fall, I think over Thanksgiving holiday, I got so crazy upset about this. I took all of the source code home and I fixed the jumping myself. Right? I still had coding chops, and so I just did it. And then I brought it back in after the Thanksgiving holidays and had Richard play it. And he said, wow, this really fixes a lot of stuff. Why don't we put out a patch? And so I'm like, okay, let's put out a patch. So we went and talked to Harvey, and Harvey seemed to be really jazzed about it. And I think we fixed probably 110 of the most major bugs, that were, after Harvey identified them. And we really wanted to get it out by Christmas, but of course we had to miss Christmas because it's an Ultima. And we put it out just after the new year. And, I felt, even if it wasn't the best we could have done, at least we did something. And I think a really famous reviewer, Scorpia, at the time, I believe that's her name, or her little nom de plume, actually re-reviewed the game because of our patch.
It did overhaul it a ton. I mean, the jumping mechanic was... It was more just the additional sort of little stutter after the landing. That was always what killed me.
Oh, yeah.
But actually, that practice of re-reviewing is still fairly rare, but I do see it a little bit more often now.
Yeah.
Jason Eli had commented on this one a little bit too, but just want to hear your thoughts regarding the party. Obviously kind of a staple of the earlier Ultima games. Was there ever a plan to include that in Ultima 8, or was it always kind of envisioned as the Avatar alone against this alien world?
So I believe that it was always supposed to be the Avatar alone. And that was going to be a major deal about Ultima 8. I can't actually recall if there were any honestly technical reasons that we did that. I think it really was design reasons. Oh, actually, you know what? There might have been one technical reason, but I'll make this as an educated guess because it's been 20 years. You'll have to forgive me. Ultima 8 was one of the first games that we used rendered characters in sprite sheets. right? So we would draw the character in like something like 3D Studio Max, even though it wasn't 3D Studio Max at the time, it was something else, right?
Whatever was the thing that then.
And we would render them all out, render all the different walking positions and fighting positions and whatnot, and then we'd put them into the game. And so the avatar, I remember the avatar being 5 megabytes worth of sprite data, and I think if we were going to have a party, we just didn't have enough memory to do all that stuff if we wanted the animations to look really good. So that might have been a real technical reason that we took the party out of Ultima 8. But honestly, if we wanted a party in Ultima 8, we could have figured it out somehow. We wouldn't have had the same kind of animation system that we did. But so I think it kind of meshed with what Richard wanted out of Pagan, and there were also some pretty serious technical problems too that kept us from doing it.
Well, I recall that too offered as an explanation for why all of a sudden you weren't able to select the sex of your avatar, which Ultima 6, Ultima 5 had offered, Ultima 7, because again, you would have had to render how many thousand frames of animation for the avatar.
Yeah. It was a big deal for us to stretch the avatar animations that far, and honestly, nobody on the team liked the fact that you couldn't be a male or female avatar anymore. Nobody liked that. That was all the way across the team. That was something that everybody was pretty depressed about. So because the avatar is supposed to be you, right?
Yeah.
So.
Sort of on a related note, then, were there any concerns about departing from Britannia? You kind of alluded to some of the concerns about sex of the avatar and the party there, but what about the departure from Britannia for the first time in a main Ultima? I mean, obviously Serpent Isle put you off in a different land as well, but that was Ultima 7 Part 2. This was the first individually numbered Ultima that wasn't Britannia, really, since 4.
I think honestly the team was excited to do that. we were kind of tired of Britannia. So many people had gone, so many Ultimas after Ultimas after Ultimas, and after a while you're just figuring like, oh no, not Moonglow again. Wow. So but there is a struggle, right? There's a struggle between what the team wants to do, is excited to do, and is capable of doing, and what the players really, really want, right? And I think you see that with games all the time these days, especially ones that are heavily sequel. And so yeah, I think we, at first we were all gung ho, hooray, Pagan, it's a new place, it's great for getting our creativity out, and but in the end, it just didn't, it turned out to be harder than we thought. We didn't have a clear plan of exactly how we were going to make it fun and exactly how we were going to make all the Ultima players really love this new place, or at least be terrified by it or whatever. We just wanted a break from Britannia, and I know Richard did. I know that's true.
Fair enough. Just coming back to the plot of the game, of course, again, we mentioned that it was fairly dark, and it kind of leaves you feeling pretty bad at the end. I mean, you have the tense duel depriving the land of healing powers, the genocide, or seeming genocide, that the Titan of Fire perpetrates, again, stealing this powerful healing artifact and magic from the world, freeing the Titan of Water and the destruction she wreaks. Did you ever expect there'd be pushback for that?
Well, what's really funny? Our experience creating Ultimas is that when we released every Ultima, it seemed like half of the players loved what we did and half of the players absolutely hated everything we did. Now, of course, that's not true. It was just the letters that we received, right? Because it's kind of like before the days of forum posts and Twitter, you had mail, and we got mail, in those days. And of course, we would always post them up on the board, and some of our Ultima players were just, we got letters from them every single time we released, and they became almost famous within the team. I think this guy's name was Donald Glinky, and I think he lived in Florida, and it's like we relished everything he wrote, right? And he always just ripped us a new one every single time we ever shipped anything. So yes, of course, we expected Actually, I think we expected Donald Blinky to set himself on fire when we shipped Pagan, but I don't think that ever happened. But yeah, I mean, we did expect a lot of pushback, and it was a very different story. But that's also because it was written by two very different people. You know, Andrew Morris and John Watson, very, very different from Richard, and this was a time for them to really, you know, this was the time for them to really do something great. You know, and you know, you can argue whether or not they succeeded, but they definitely succeeded in doing something very different from what Richard would have done.
It is a very different game.
One might even say a great game, but maybe not a great Ultima.
I've heard that thrown around a few times. Yeah, it's. I mean, obviously, it stands as a great, you know, precursor to games like. Well, I mean, Diablo. I don't think would be the same as it was. I don't would have been what it was absent Ultima 8. So, you know, obviously, it had I think it had a very large impact. But yeah, it's kind of always just been this point of controversy in the Ultima fandom.
Yeah.
Is there anything you can recall in particular about the game's development? Leaving aside the jumping, because obviously we've talked about that, and that's kind of a known thing. Any other odd or unusual bugs that drove the team mad, or, you know, like a really hilarious story that occurred at some point during its composition?
Yeah. Let's see. A few of them. Certainly, one thing I can say is that, you know, to a lot of people on the development team, you know, Ultima, unfortunately, was a very negative development experience. You know, there was a lot of things going on at Origin at the time, you know, with the EA acquisition that were both scary and, you know, hard to understand how we were supposed to react to them. You know, most of the team who were managing Ultima, myself especially, it was our first really big management task, and so, you know, to say I really screwed it up doesn't really come close, I think, you know, to you know, to the truth. No, I think it's fair. I think it's totally fair. I mean, you know, you can't just put anybody at the helm of an oil tanker and say, you know, take it through the straits and not expect something really horrible to happen. And you know, Ultima was a big ship to steer, and it was unfortunate that I never had the chance to really figure out how to manage a team that large. You know, it took me another 10 years to really get better at it. But enough of the bad stuff. Some of the funny stories that I recall, you know, I remember trying to print out the script, you know, because we were actually doing Ultima we were doing simultaneous localization for the first time ever, I believe. And we were doing English, French, and German. And so we had this huge team of foreign language testers and foreign language localizers like embedded with us right there on the development floor. And at some point we're like, hey, we really got to print out the script. We want to see this thing. And I tried to print it out, and I literally destroyed an Epson printer in doing so. It nearly set the poor thing on fire after printing out like this many pages all in one go. It was absolutely terrifying. I remember it took about 4 hours to build Ultima 8 from the moment we hit go until when I had discs in my hand, and most of it was automatic. Right, we wrote this crazy script to do it all by itself, and so I would go downstairs and play Robotron for like 4 hours straight while the dang thing was building. And I remember getting really, really good at that game, and I'm actually still pretty good at that game because of it. Yeah, pretty crazy stuff. But you know what most people remember from Ultima 8 is the overtime, which was really bad. It was really bad. We should have not done that.
Yeah, that's still a problem in some sectors of the game industry, as I recall. I mean, I'm from Edmonton. I grew up with. I shouldn't say grew up. That has the wrong connotation. I spent a lot of my late high school and college university years around guys who worked at BioWare, and you know, sang in choirs with them, especially took some courses that they helped design, and I don't think I ever saw one of those guys come in without, you know, bags down to here. You know, they were just getting slaughtered on the crunch times. I gather it's better there now, because of course they can kind of command larger teams and more teams, so they don't all have to work around the clock. They can have different shifts. But yeah, I don't envy that.
Yeah.
Kind of keeping on the same theme, what about the engine or the game in particular? And anything in either of those that you're sort of very personally proud of? Something that you put in maybe that people haven't noticed yet?
So okay, so I may have done a little bit of programming here and there, on Ultima 8, but most of the coding and certainly the code leadership was done by Tony Zurvek. I don't know if you've ever spoken to him or not, but he was the lead coder, and I remember after Ultima 7 was done, all of the Ultima 7 programmers we went outside and sat under a big tree and we designed Ultima 8's technology. And we had a big whiteboard, and we really wanted to do it upright. And I honestly believe that Ultima 8 had probably some of the best technology that was in any Ultima that ever came out. It was really, really cool stuff. In fact, some of the things that we're only seeing in game development now, Ultima 8 actually had 20 years ago.
Such as? You got an example?
We had a fully networked editor.
Nice.
Back in those days.
Yeah.
What's that?
Which I gather was in-game, correct? Like you were you were basically...
The editor?
Yeah, moving through the game.
No, it wasn't in-game. It was a special tool that there was a window of the tool. I mean, if you've ever used the Unity engine, you can kind of look at it as a very early precursor to something like that, right?
Okay. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, multiple designers working on maps all at the same time, and they could email each other. The scripting language was really, really cool because it had cooperative multitasking built into the system, so you could do things like script a character to pathfind over to a door, script another character to pathfind to the window. When both characters arrived at their destination, they would both bark a certain thing at the same time, and if either one of those characters didn't make it to the destination, some other thing could happen, and you could actually write it almost like a screenplay. It was really, really cool, and that system was designed by Tony Zurevec and Zach Simpson, and it was honestly, I haven't seen a scripting language that was that cool even since. Only now am I starting to see stuff like that.
Wow. That does sound awesome.
Yeah, we just didn't know what we had. We had something pretty cool back then.
This is a common theme.
We also built our own. We built our own source control management system. Right? We didn't have. Yeah. So we built that, and we built our own networked file system, and we built all our own stuff.
You keep saying that line. We didn't. We didn't know what we were doing. This is Dan Schmidt spoke with him quite some time ago. He kind of made this comment about Ultima Underworld. It was just like, we were just a bunch of kids. We didn't know we weren't supposed to be able to do all this.
Yeah, that's true. We didn't, but we were a lot younger and energetic.
You've mentioned Richard a few times, so just formalizing the question, how involved was he in Ultima 8's development, and what sort of input did you get from him regarding the direction the game was going?
So Richard is and always has been a really collaborative designer. He's extraordinarily opinionated. He knows what he likes, right? So if you ever go to Richard with an idea that isn't what he likes, it's really difficult to convince him that you're not going to do what he wants to do. But he's a great guy to work with. He's very down to earth. He's, like I said, very collaborative. He was extremely involved at the beginning, I would say, right? And then as the project drew on and went from, I would say, sort of the pre-production mode to production, Richard was dealing with 3 different simultaneous projects. So he had me directing Ultima 8. He had Tony Bratton directing a project, and he had Ken Demras directing a project. And so Richard was managing 3 project directors and trying to keep all that going, while he was, of course, behind the scenes negotiating with Electronic Arts to, to merge with Origin. So there's a lot going on there, right? And so, of course, towards the end of Ultima 8, he wasn't as involved, I would say, on a daily basis, right? On the minute-to-minute, minute-to-minute workings of Ultima 8. And to be honest, I kind of wish he would have been, because I think he would have intuitively understood some of the problems that we were going through and had some solutions for him. But he's only one guy, so there was just too much else going on.
Yeah, understandable, because there was a ton there, and I mean, you were probably ramping up for development of what was then called Ultima Online.
Not quite yet. I think Ultima Online didn't really start up until after Crusader ship. But I could be wrong about the timeline.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
You mentioned this a little bit about how it impacted you, and I mean, obviously it's kind of a thing that we've discussed a little bit already. Ultima 8 wasn't as well received by the Ultima fandom, although, to be fair, the earlier Ultimas got their fair bit of hate mail.
Always, but...
But by the same token, and despite the fact that in a lot of ways it was negatively received by the established fandom, certainly I've noticed that it also seems to have brought a number of people to the series. I have lost count of the number of people I've encountered over the years, the zealous Ultima fans who are just like, yeah, Pagan was my first game.
Wow.
All right then. So. And you've kind of already given some of your thoughts on the reception the game received, especially how it impacted you personally. Is there anything you kind of wanted to add or clarify about that?
Well, I would, to be honest, it's something that I haven't heard until you told me, right? And even though I may have met a couple people that played Pagan first, and talked to me about it, but certainly you're way more involved in the community, this ongoing Ultima community, which, by the way, I think is extremely cool. The fact that people came to Pagan first and thought it was groundbreaking and a really cool game, and that makes me very, very happy. I mean, and I'll certainly pass that along to all the Ultima 8 teammates that I still keep in touch with, which are actually quite a few, because I think they'd be happy to know it. I mean, nothing makes a game developer feel better than to know that somebody enjoyed playing their game. That's really why we do it. It certainly isn't the money.
Fair enough. No, it's something I have heard from a number of people, and it's there's been some debate, and obviously we don't have the sales sheets to necessarily back this up, but it's. For all the negative publicity it may have gotten, its reach in terms of bringing new people into the fold seems to have been fairly significant overall. So that's
that's probably also due to the fact that the market itself is growing. I mean, PC games at that time were really hot. I mean, crazy hot. So it doesn't surprise me at all to have seen something like that. Entice a lot of people. I mean, after all, it had a huge flaming pentagram on the box. You don't think it's not going to get noticed, at your typical Best Buy.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
So your target audience of your 18 to 24-year-old male is going to go buy a box with a flaming pentagram on it.
That alone would have probably brought in a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. That, by the way, was Richard's idea, and marketing, Origin Marketing really hated it. I don't know if you knew about that. But they really hated it.
Yeah, I do recall hearing that, and he was quite insistent on it, as I recall.
Oh, yeah, He wanted that, and he got it.
You mentioned the fandom a little bit, and obviously the Ultima fandom have been remarkably prolific. They're great. And one of the aspects of the fandom, and actually one of the things that led to the creation of the website I run, was the sheer number of fans who took it on themselves to do something with the games, whether it was to come up with slightly better graphics set for Ultima 4. You know, this is a slightly higher, or not necessarily higher res because the tile size is fixed, but you know, more color, more detail, or to patch something that never quite got patched within the game's support window, or you know, maybe the most famous example is the Dungeon Siege-based remake of Ultima 5, Ultima 5 Lazarus, which was just incredible. You know, the lead designer on that is now working at BioWare Montreal.
Yeah.
Ultima 8 had its share of these, though. The most notable is probably Pentagram, which is a revamped engine for the game, if you will. It's, you know, it requires the original game data files to run, but with those, then it's been built for Windows and Mac OS X, I know for sure. It just allows the game to run, you know, within sort of the Windows environment without having to jump through memory management hoops or rely on DOSBox.
Yeah.
Have you ever actually had a chance to try that or any of the other ones, Exalt, XU4, any of the fan-made projects that have sort of reimagined these Ultima engines for modern systems?
You know, I will admit to you, sadly, that I have not had a chance to try these out, but I think I'm definitely going to give them a shot. After I left Origin, I really started focusing more on console games. You know, so that's kind of when I, you know, started going down that track, and so I've been more of a console gamer, you know, ever since then. Although I've really wanted, you know, kind of secretly wanted another Ultima to try to play. So, you know, I'll have to give those a shot and see what they're like. I can't wait to try it.
I'm personally a big fan of Nuvi. Ultima 6 is my favorite. It's kind of what brought me to the series. And Nuvi basically has become my favorite. I've kind of been very resistant to the idea of, you know, that Ultima 6 ever needed improvement, but having seen what those guys have done, you know, the game is playable in full screen. They figured out how to add roofs to the game. It's awesome.
That's pretty cool.
I'm going to assume that, well, no, I mean, I shouldn't assume. Have you ever gone back and actually replayed Ultima 8?
No, I have not. I have not.
All right. I probably should have asked this one.
I don't think for the longest time, I don't think I had a computer that would play.
Yeah, that's the big problem, right? Getting it to run on a system. But then arguably that was part of the Ultimate experience too, wasn't it? Is, you know, finding that lower memory mouse maneuver and tweaking your audio settings to eke out those extra 3K, 4K that you needed to get the game to load. Ah, the good old days.
To walk into the store and to buy the computer and buy the copy of the Ultima that you were going to run on said computer.
Exactly. Yeah. For all the jokes about how Wing Commanders were the performance-hogging games, Ultima, I think, went there a little bit ahead of that.
No doubt.
I probably should have asked this one earlier, but who actually came up with the jumping mechanic?
Who came up with the jumping mechanic? Well,
you know, and that can be either the question of, you know, who said, hey, we should have a jumping mechanic. Well, no, that was probably Richard.
That was Richard. Richard said, hey, let's have jumping.
Yeah.
So I remember Tony Zurbeck, who was the main coder at the time. I believe he was the guy that wrote the jumping system, right? But after writing the jumping system, it was up to the designers of the different levels and areas of the game to kind of implement this system in various different ways, you know, to make the game fun. So you know, there's no one person that did it, right? And even then, you know, of course, QA gets involved and goes, hey, you know, this could be a whole lot better, and you know, then so everybody gets involved with, you know, with something like that. So I think for us, it was such a departure from what we were used to, and honestly, a jumping mechanic like that we were trying to do, I think that we just didn't have enough people on the team who were really hardcore platformer players, right? You know, something like Mario or something like that, where you have an intuitive feel for what works in a jumping system and what doesn't work in a jumping system. You know, I certainly hadn't played a lot of those games until then, and so I honestly didn't know what I was looking for, right? Honestly, that's a case where I would say we should have listened a whole lot more to QA. They were platformers, right? They played every Nintendo console out there, and when they came back to us and said, "Hey, this jumping is kind of busted," you know, I think sometimes product development we get on the high horse and go, "It's not busted," you know, we know what we're doing. In that case, I think that was a horrible mistake, horrible mistake on our part, you know, to not listen to them and to think that we really didn't know what we were doing at the time. You know, but hey, we were in our 20s. I mean, when you're in your 20s, you think you've got godlike powers and you're immortal. So, you know, luckily most of our Ultima 8, you know, teammates, you know, figured that out later in life, and now we can look back and go, oh God, what were we thinking? Why did we do that? So.
All right. Concerning the magic system in the game, which was again another wild departure from kind of where Ultima had gone before. Where did the choices of terms like theurgy, which I gather is a fairly hot topic these days in ancient philosophy and religious studies, where was that sourced from, along with that enhanced sense of magic as a ritual? And given how persnickety the system can be, was there a lot of trial and error in getting it to work?
You mean like putting a candle on a specific pixel to get a spell to work? That?
That's the
wow.
way of saying it. Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know who can be credited with coming up with all of those things, right? I do know that it was John Watson and Andrew Morris who, somehow out of their office came those ideas, right? My guess is that it was a collaborative effort between the two of them, but you'd honestly have to track down Andrew Morris and find out from him, because John Watson, unfortunately, is no longer with us. So Andrew's going to have that secret, and he may. You'll have to just go find it and ask him.
I will. I will be sure to.
Yeah. And when you do, tell him I said howdy, because I haven't seen him in like 20 years.
All right, pass that along. Yeah, I think he's way out of the games industry now. He seems to do just
he left the games industry.
To do like creative consulting. So.
Yeah. Yeah. He as we say, he orbited out.
Fair enough. I'll keep in mind if I hear that term again.
Yeah.
So, kind of moving on, sort of more specific now, questions about content. There was a weird Lieutenant Vitek Skull of Quakes subplot. Do you have any recollection of that?
So, no, I don't. I don't have any recollection of that, and neither does Mark Vitek, who I emailed about it the moment I got your question. I'm like, Mark, what the heck is this? He goes, I have no idea. So Mark Vitek doesn't even know what it's all about.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I've kind of got. I'm just kind of moving past here. So, like, there was the undead invasion plot of Earth. So that's probably lost the time.
That's like 20 years after the fact. It's like, okay, it's getting a little sketchy trying to remember what all that stuff was.
Yeah.
And, of course, we're trying to remember that at a time where none of us were getting any sleep whatsoever. So,
not the best memory.
There you go.
Yeah, right. One more. I mean, you did mention some that, some questions that you just had absolutely no recollection of, and that's fine. So I've got those all pulled up here, and I'll skip past those. Okay. But one in particular that you didn't exempt, so I'm going to ask this out of hope. It was hinted in Ultima 8, you're becoming a new Titan of Ether, this new thing in the Ultima story.
Yeah.
And at the end of Ultima 8, you're this big, powerful, helmeted Titan. You're walking through these glowing ivory halls. Who knows where they are, and who knows where you're bound for. And obviously the last scene of the game is the big, shocking reveal. To which I maintain that Battlestar Galactica, the new series, probably owes a great debt, just for the way it leaves you utterly hanging in this gut-punched state.
Yeah.
The Titan overlooking the Guardian of this ruined wasteland. But then in Ultima 9, you're this blonde dude at his house in Austin. or
Right.
whatever.
So,
Do you have any recollection of why the disconnect?
yeah. Okay. So one thing is that certainly the people that made Ultima 9 were not the people that made Ultima 8.
Fair enough.
I think the only, well, I'm not even really entirely sure. I know Richard was there for Ultima 9, you know. I was on Ultima 9 for a time, but Ultima 9 had a significant reboot after Ultima Online shipped, right? You know, it's almost like the game got underway, got under development, and then Ultima Online came on. The whole Ultima 9 team went over to Ultima Online. Most of those people left Origin, and then a new Ultima 9 team came aboard to continue the project and finish it. So, you know, that said, I've often wondered how much, you know, and I've never had a long conversation with Richard about this, but I'd be interested in asking this someday. How much he just considered Ultima 8 to be his Highlander 2. Right?
Oh, man.
He's like, yeah, Ultima 8, okay, let's get on and let's move forward. Right? Okay, but that said, think about the intense game design problem that you would have if you had an all-powerful character begin the game. I submit to you, it's one of the reasons why you almost never see a Superman game out there. Why? Because he's invulnerable. He can do anything he wants. He always wins. There's really not much of a challenge there. Players would get bored. They like the sense of progression. They like the sense of gaining new things, gaining new skills, gaining new levels, and building your character over time for the ultimate conflict. I mean, that's a very typical game development and game design motif. That would not have been true unless you drastically changed Britannia, like in the things that lived there. Okay, if you start as the Titan Ether, what's the boss monster at the end of the game? I don't know. You know, it's like rabbits are all Titans of Ether. You know, so you do have serious problems there. Yeah. You know, so I think just the practical nature of how to make an Ultima work from beginning to end as a narrative thread and as a game design, you know, and as something to allow players to feel like they have progression, you can't start all powerful. So, you know, I guess, you know, call it a bit of a problem with, well, so we weren't really maybe thinking all the way ahead at the end when we were figuring out the story for Ultima 8. What happens for Ultima 9 if you're the Titan of Ether? How does that really work out? You know, so I guess that's a roundabout answer, but there you go.
Well, it does make sense. Actually, it's funny you mentioned, you know, sort of Richard and the Highlander 2 reference there. I've always remarked, because of course Ultima 8 and Ultima 9, there's a fair bit of debate that goes on within the Ultima fandom about these games and their quality and authenticities as Ultima titles and all the rest. And I've always noticed that, you know, Richard is very ready to admit that Ultima 8 had its flaws and had its issues, but he's much quicker to defend Ultima 9. It's really kind of this weird thing that he does.
Right. Well, he was a lot more involved in Ultima 9 than he was Ultima 8. I think that's fair to say.
It is, at least
right.
toward the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, this Ultima 9 was clearly, you know, because and even though I wasn't there at Origin to finish Ultima 9, I think he felt it as a personal quest to make sure that Ultima 9 ended up a better game. And you know, he had always designed it as a trilogy of trilogies.
Mm-hmm.
This is the last one. You know, you don't want to leave that with a fizzle, right? So he really wanted to knock it out of the park. So I think he really tried.
You were the project director for Ultima 9 in its earliest incarnation.
Yeah, it was.
Which obviously was wildly different, or probably was wildly different from what finally shipped. And this is the question I'm actually really hoping that, this is the question I have a lot of my hope riding on. Because obviously the game did iterate significantly, especially in terms of plot. I mean, also the tech iterated a lot, but it's the plot, story and the iterations there that have kind of been shrouded in mystery for a great many years. There was the Bob White plot treatment, which came to light some years ago. There was plot treatment by Ed Del Castillo, who was brought in over from Westwood, which I thought was really quite brilliant, although he kind of seems to have been the sacrificial lamb for some of that. And we've seen those, but those were all later stage plot treatments. And then obviously we've seen the final plot of the game. What we know nothing about is that, the initial kind of idea for what its story would be, essentially back when you were helming it.
Yeah.
Do you have any recollections about, what some of the storylines were? Just to throw out an example, obviously Ultima 9 ends with this idea that the Guardian is the Avatar's evil half, if you will, created back in Ultima 4 when he first became the Avatar. So, was that a thing that was in the design from its initial stages? What can you just tell us about the story back then?
Okay. So at the very original start of Ultima 9, it was a very, very, very small team. Most of the Ultima 8 people had gone off to do Crusader, right? Which was Tony Zervek's first big project. So the people that were left on Ultima 9, and this is actually while Lost Veil was still in development, I believe. It was Dennis Loubet, the art director, right, the lead artist for Ultima and for almost all Ultimas that had come before it. John Watson, right, who was the developer and the designer, and he took the lion's share of kind of how to write the story. But the three of us definitely worked together really hard on it. And I recall it being probably one of the best times I had at Origin, because it was that blank slate kind of thing, and where we wanted to take the story. So the Guardian and the Avatar are always two halves of the same coin, right? Two sides of the same coin. And the question was how, we weren't really sure about exactly how we were going to get to the ending, but there was one ending that that the three of us liked that unfortunately nobody else did. So I'll tell you what I recall of that ending. So at the very end of the game, you progress all the way to where you're going to have your final battle with the Guardian. And for the first time, you actually go into battle with the Guardian with Lord British at your side, right? It's both of you who are going into battle with the Guardian. Because he's tearing Britannia apart, right? So Lord British wants to come with you in a new sense of courage and companionship.
Yeah, so, he never really does much before that.
He levels you up and gives you stuff, and you're like, hey. Of course the battle itself between the Avatar and the Guardian is physically tearing Britannia apart, right? So at some point, Lord British implores you to stop. Stop, right? And if the player doesn't stop, they actually lose. Britannia is destroyed. Okay, it's a losing scenario. If they do stop, and I think this is why it didn't work, because nobody liked that. If you did stop, you went all Ben Kenobi on the Guardian. He kills you, and he kills you. He just freaking kills you, and then. We cut to some cutscene where you see the Guardian's head explode. I don't know what we were going to do. But, when he kills the Avatar, he kills himself, right? So, fade to black, everybody expects credits to roll going, wow, that was pretty depressing. Except for it's not fade to black. Lord British is right there. He resurrects you, not as the Avatar, but just that human that you started the entire experience with all those years ago, but maybe with a little wisdom that you brought with you. So that's how we wanted to end the story. You know, it was we didn't want you to end the story as some sort of ascended being. We wanted you to just be you. You started the game as you. We wanted to end the game as you. So that was what we wanted to do. But you know, it had its own wacky problems that you know some people didn't like. So it never really came to pass.
Oh, pity. That sounds awesome. And you kind of also did confirm there that Ultima 9 was kind of always meant to be set in Britannia, I suppose.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because I remember,
yeah, we got tired of Pagan real fast. We wanted to go back to Britannia and build Moonglow again.
Well, you know, it's nice to visit some places, but it's good to come home.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah. So, let me just see here. I'm right. The magic system in Ultima 9 is again just crazy wild. Do you have any recollection of how the development of that happened?
You know, when we first started Ultima 9, we were going to do pretty much a straight up Ultima-based magic system.
Oh, okay.
You know, right? Words, blah blah blah. You know, and I'll admit to you freely, I've never played Ultima 9. Never had a computer that could play it. So I had a problem. I guess it's fair, right, to all the Ultima fans out there who couldn't afford computers, you know, to play Ultimas, that I would be, you know, stuck with that one day. But no, I think the magic system for Ultima 9 was obviously developed by, you know, somebody, you know, who was at the team after.
Okay.
And honestly, I have no idea who that would have been.
Honestly,
I don't think it was John. I think John Watson. I know he took a large part of Ultima 9 while he was there, but he left Origin and moved to California, and you know, to, you know, essentially go find his fortune outside of Origin's walls. And so I don't know who developed the magic system for Ultima 9.
Fair enough. I know it's one of the few Ultimas I play where I almost never touch the spell book. So
yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, I know. It's just kind of, mind you, you don't really need to. You can really play that through almost as a pure fighter.
Huh.
So we mentioned before, of course, that, you know, Ultima 8 had the avatar facing Pagan alone. Was the plan for Ultima 9 to return to a party-based design, if at all possible?
You know,
or
I know.
To follow up on our earlier discussion, sorry, just to expand that, because we got into the other topic too, party or sex selection.
Oh, right. So, you know, definitely the desires of everybody who got into Ultima 9 on the development side, we wanted to return to our roots. We really did. You know, so it was a matter of how are we going to do that. But we were also going to go 3D, right? There was a big break pretty much early on in development. After a while, we were like, you know what? We've got to make a big splash, you know, by taking Ultima 9 full 3D. That turned out to be wicked, wicked, wicked hard at that time. You know, how do you get what all of the Ultima players expect in terms of the detail and beauty with essentially what looked like, you know, the earliest stage, earliest stage EverQuest graphics that everybody, you know, still loved, but you're like, wow, those are some blocky trees, right? Yeah. So, you know, we did a lot of experiments early on, and even, you know, 200 or 300 polygons per character, we just couldn't do, you know, in those days. Just couldn't do it fast enough, and we were still doing software rendering. We weren't doing hardware rendering, because there was no hardware rendering until about a year after we started development. So, man, we struggled that hard. And so after about the first 6 or 8 months of just jacking around with 3D and trying to get an Ultima-looking game out of it, we're just like, wow, there's just no way. We can't we can't build an Ultima with a party. We can't even have more than, say, 3 or 4 characters on the screen at the same time, which was sad. It just didn't feel right, But we were pushing the envelope really hard. I don't know how far they got with the hardware rendering, because I know they did do hardware rendering for Ultima 9, thank goodness. I don't know how far they were eventually able to take it, though.
Well, you didn't have a party, and you were still the blonde guy. So there were obviously some limitations there.
Yeah.
One of the other complaints about sort of the world design is that Britannia feels a little bit on the smallish side, which I suppose I suppose is a fair criticism. Again, Ultima 6 is my touchstone here, but like Britannia's huge, and there's just what's the joke? Huge tracts of land, right? There are. I mean, there's empty spaces in Britannia, bigger than
yeah. And you felt when you entered into a city, you're stomping around Britannia and say Ultima 5 or Ultima 6, and you enter a city, you're now in that city, and it's like a whole new level, right? So it feels huge, right? And
well, Ultima 6,
Ultima 7,
right? And it's
right. Ultima 6 was Ultima 5 was the last, one. We actually tried to get Richard to go back to that outer world map, inner city map with Ultima 9. And I remember the meeting, it's clear as day, going in there, going, Richard, we want to do this. This is the right way to do it. We're all going to do it. And we're going to convince him. And we came out of the meeting 2 hours later, and we didn't do it.
Well, you mentioned that you had an idea that was his. It was his, and that was...
Well, here's the funny thing. It wasn't just him stomping his feet saying, no, it's my idea, so this is what... It was. We went out of that meeting convinced he was right. He's got this charisma thing about him where he just casts this spell on you, and you're like, yes, Richard, we're gonna do it exactly the way you said.
That's hilarious.
And somehow you walk out of that meeting. The weird thing is that the farther away from the conference room you walk, the more you remember about what you thought about what you were going into it with, but it's too late. You can't. The meeting's over.
That's funny.
It is funny. And I'm not kidding about that. That he's got that in spades. So
I've had a chance to speak with him a few times actually. Yeah, he's a force of personality, definitely.
Indeed.
Yeah, very charismatic. To that point, actually, you mentioned some of the other team members beforehand. Richard, obviously. Do you still keep in touch with or collaborate with? I mean, it seems, from my observation, that people who left. Well, I mean, Origin's gone now, but people who left the orbit kind of wound up back in each other's orbits at various points in history. So, do you keep in touch with other ex-Originites or work with any of them? What kind of camaraderie exists?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody who who was at Origin back in those days, like we have an ex-Origin Facebook page, and it's by invite only, and a lot of us keep in touch with each other through LinkedIn and in person, right? A lot of people, of course, have moved all over the planet. They live all over the United States and all over the world now. I saw Dennis LeBay last weekend. I mean, as it turns out, we happened to be at the same function together, and of course, I hadn't seen him in many, many years, and it was just great catching up. I email a lot of them a lot. Billy Kane and I are really, really good friends. We hang out quite a bit. But yeah, I don't know, that common path of doing great things and working really hard, harder than any set of humans deserves to or needs to on a game, and so it's really created a lot of excellent friendships and some close bonds. We may not see each other very often, but every time we do, it's all hugs and man, it's been forever. How's it going? So, and a lot of those people I do stay in touch with. So yeah.
Well, that's
We're good
great.
friends.
I'm actually going to switch the order of the last couple questions here, because
Okay.
the one that
I
I
didn't memorize the orders.
the one that I had slated for last actually goes a little bit better along with this. Assuming that the necessary factors align to make it possible, would you want to work on another Ultima game, or with these people on another game in that mold?
Well, first of all, a lot of those people that I worked with back at Origin, I'd dig ditches with these people. Okay? So, because one of the things that I've learned is, through working on a lot of different games with a lot of different people, it's actually not the game that you enjoy working on as much as you enjoy the people that you're working with, right? So that says something. I mean, that's why I say I would dig ditches with these people, and I would, Now that said, if Richard, well, in a weird sort of way, what's going on with Shroud of the Avatar, I mean that is kind of what he's doing, and there's a lot of people who worked on the original Ultimas, Star Long being one of them, just one of them, who have joined Richard's efforts at Portalarium, right? So, I think the question is would I want to do another Ultima, right, in that vein? Actually, I think it'd be freaking amazing to do an Ultima on the iPad, right? An Ultima-like adventure on the iPad. I think that would be fantastic. Old school sprite engine. Hell yeah. The question is can we pry it away from Electronic Arts to do it? And the answer to that is hell no. Why? I have no idea. Maybe they're just pissed at Richard. But if Richard could get the Ultima license back from Electronic Arts, he would do it. He would do it.
He's alluded to that a few times, and actually, you mentioned it for the iPad, and he's passionate about local gaming.
Oh yeah, it'd be great. It'd be great for the iPad.
I don't suppose you ever tried Ultima Forever?
No, I never did.
Yeah. Anyways,
it doesn't have a DualShock interface, right? So that's the problem.
No, I don't think it's
we need to come up with an Ultima interface and has racing cars. Probably wouldn't go over with the fan base very well. They'll accuse me of breaking away just like I did at Ultima 8. So
I've heard some interesting stories about other ideas that were being tossed around with the property. The one that always fascinated me was this idea for an Ultima RTS.
Oh, wow.
Which weird. Actually, depending on where you set it in the timeline, could work. There's that whole history of how the Bloody Plains got its name.
Yes.
But
yeah, it could work. I mean, the funny thing about that is that all the combat, in Ultima was always very personal, right? It wasn't huge armies stomping around and huge units stomping around. Well, that's not true. In Ultima 1, you fought like about 1,000 different of those dang orcs at the end of the at the end of the game. So, and that's all you did for like 2 hours straight. So there's that.
Think about the wave combat in Dragon Age 2. They have no idea.
Yeah. Actually, it's weird. It could be kind of cool. The real question is would it be an Ultima or not? And I think honestly, it probably wouldn't be, right? An Ultima was such a playground for you and your companions, right, to go off and adventure. Yes, it might be set in Britannia, but okay, then let's call it RTS Britannia, and it's a different thing.
Yeah, something like that. Anyways, kind of just winding us down here. What are you working on now? You mentioned console. So
yeah. I've definitely worked on a few console games since then. My time at Redfly Studio, up until I guess about a year ago, I'd worked on games for the Nintendo Wii and the 3DS, and so that was a blast. While I was there, Redfly did Ghostbusters for the Wii and Star Wars Force Unleashed 2 for the Wii and Thor 3DS. So it was a lot of fun, and even Redfly's original IP game, Mushroom Men, which anybody who has a Wii out there, go play Mushroom Men. It's it's a little broken and a little quirky, but it's still pretty cool. So that was their first game. But you know, the funny thing about consoles now is that it's starting to get really hard to get console gigs. And what's really heating up now is doing games on Android and iOS, you know, basically mobile and tablet. And that's what I'm working on right now. I'm working on social games. Yeah, exactly. Where I got another tablet around here somewhere. But working on a stealth startup with two really, really, really good, you know, people here in the Austin area. Gordon Walton of Star Wars, you know, fame, you know, Star Wars Galaxies fame, and Todd Coleman. Yeah, and Todd Coleman, who did Wizards 101 at King's Isle, right? He was the lead designer. And so, yeah, so we've come together to form a little company, and we're gonna do social games on mobile where you can play with your friends. And you know, it's really cool stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Richard has talked actually a fair bit about the potential of Shroud of the Avatar when he was still teasing it as his ultimate RPG was supposed to actually be that.
Right.
And then at some point he made the transition back to, you know, sort of a PC-facing game, although he still actually expresses his desire to see the game come to iPad at some point.
Yeah, I find what's really difficult is for designers like Richard, you know, and even Todd Coleman, like, you know, I talk with him at the office all the time about this. It's really tricky for game designers who've been working in the PC space for a long time to go to mobile space. It's so much smaller. I mean, it's amazing. You know, I mean, you know, 50 megabytes is a tiny little space, you know, to put your game in, you know, and that's kind of where it is, you know, especially if you want it to be a good game over in China. And it's hard, really hard to do that for a PC gamer like Richard. So, you know, hopefully they'll figure it out. I think there's a lot of good stuff going on there, but you know, but PC games are still doing okay, you know, so they'll be fine. Portalarium will be fine.
Well, you know, I mean, they're using Unity, so they have the luxury of being able to publish to Windows, obviously, Mac, Linux.
Yep. Yeah, it's easy. I mean, I use Unity all the time, and I think that little game engine is going to take over the world, man.
You know, I tripped onto it a few years ago, and I mean, I've only really ever dabbled with it myself, but I tripped onto it when I was trying to figure out what Gameloft had used to build Dungeon Hunter.
Ah.
And at the time, I mean, it was like, I think, at version 2, so, you know, the asset store was barely a thing, and it obviously was not anywhere nearly advanced, and the tutorials weren't nearly as good, and it was a lot kludgier to get into, so I struggled. But I remember telling a friend of mine who I correspond with fairly regularly in France, like, you know, this looks like it'll be a thing.
Yeah, it's going to be a thing. It's a thing. It's a thing now.
I felt rather vindicated in that last year, and I almost wish I would have like bought stock or something, because I mean, you know, all of a sudden Kickstarter exploded with Unity games, and not just like, you know, Dungeon Hunter next, but Shroud, Torment, Project Eternity, Wasteland.
Yeah, Wasteland, God.
I mean, just, yeah, it's an amazingly prolific engine. And I think it's Canadian, too. I think they're based out of Montreal.
Amsterdam, I think. I could be wrong about that. I thought it was maybe that's just where the CEO is. Here.
But I think in these days I could see, you know, having global support being a good thing, so.
Oh, yeah.
Well, at any rate, that is all I had. That is the sum total of questions that the Ultima fandom collectively were able to put together. So,
those are crazy good questions, by the way. I would expect nothing less of all.
Yeah, and this group actually, you know, I mean, the Ultimate Dragons, of course, go way back. They started on Prodigy. They moved to the internet. So of course there was, you know, RGCUD. That was rec.games.computer.ultima.dragons or something like that.
Yeah.
Was there
that's actually when I joined them. I don't know if I ever got my membership revoked, but I still believe that I'm an alien dragon.
Well, I should check the roster next time I log in. Kind of the
Check the
roster is
roster.
current and grand, so. Um, and of
Yeah.
course now they've moved to this Facebook group, which has surpassed 700 and some members. Not all of whom are necessarily active all the time, but I mean, it's proven a remarkably prolific community for the old discussions to happen anew. So,
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was a great place to source questions because I mean there are so many people there who can think of so many other things beyond just what I can keep in my head. Wonderful.
Yeah, they are.
So, anyways, just with that, I'm going to just take this off air and we can wrap up. But just publicly at any rate, thank you for taking the time. I'm glad we were able to finally do this. This was great and informative. It was wonderful.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It was a fantastic and terrifying trip down memory lane. And but it does sometimes being able to remember all those old things and brings me a little closer to some of those people that I haven't seen in a long time. And for me, that's what's really important. So I'm really glad to have been invited, and I really appreciate the opportunity.